All right, looks like we're good to go. Again, we're starting this conversation, and I want to open the conversation with this statement. The stories that you live by today were written by a child who was just trying to survive. And I want that to sink in. Because for many of us, we don't realize how much the story that we tell ourselves about our past experiences are dictating the reality that we're experiencing every day of our lives. I want to give you all some evidence behind this concept of inner child healing to give you all a real understanding of why we choose this path as the foundation for our healing challenge. First, I want you to understand that the brain always seeks closure. We do not know how to live with unanswered questions. This is exactly why we have religion and every other mode of study or belief system, is because as our nature, we're not wired to live with unanswered questions, especially children. So, from an early age, our brains want to understand the cause and effect even before we can put words together. Our minds are already calculating this happens, that happens. If you really think about this, this is how we learn through cause and effect. So when something painful happens, like emotional neglect or rejection or abandonment, a child doesn't have enough information to explain it to his or herself rationally. The mind can't tolerate uncertainty, so it fills the gaps with a conclusion. So, to the question of where the limiting belief comes from, or why we conclude when we experience trauma that we are not good enough or that is something wrong with us, this is the foundational understanding of why we do this. Because a child's perspective is inherently self centered and not in a selfish way. It's all about just more so in the terms of their cognitive development. So if you think about it, as a child, your view of the world is more centered upon how the world is engaging with you, and that's how you determine things about the world. The way that I'm treated here determines if I'm safe here. The way that I feel how I'm treated here determines how I can live in these spaces. That is our natural way of engaging with the environment around us. So children process their experiences as a reflection of themselves. Does that make sense to you all? Happy Hill and Kimberly Smith and everyone else that is joining the conversation. You have tapped into what we lovingly call here the Courage to Heal podcast with myself, Coach Kohn. We are in week 7 of our Trauma to Triumph Healing Challenge. And week 7 is all about rewriting the narrative of your story. And one of the things that I've gotten is a lot of feedback from the participants of our healing challenge is that sometimes I hear people repeating the same stories about their experiences, not realizing that this story is the narrative that is dictating your decisions, your perspective, and how you see yourself. And until we learn how to reframe and rewrite that story continues to dictate the narrative. So, if a parent is emotionally unavailable, a child doesn't have the context to say, my parents are struggling with their own wounds and their own emotions, and that's why they can't connect with me. You don't have that context as a child. So when you're experiencing that parent that is emotionally unavailable, instead, what do you think? It must be me. I must be unlovable. Does that make sense to you all? That child doesn't have the cognitive ability to process the complex adult emotions, so the only explanation available is one that makes sense to them because of the pain. You add the other factors of the fact that our children are engaging with the world around them. They're engaging with television and entertainment, and they look around and they compare themselves to the experiences of their peers. And if they start to notice a difference, if they see other kids are receiving love, or if you saw that other kids were receiving love and attention and validation that you were not, it's easy for you to then assume you didn't assume that my parents are struggling. You didn't assume that my parents are not emotionally available because their parents weren't emotionally available to them. But no, the easy assumption for a child based on the information that is available to them is something must be wrong with me. And this belief, through the continuation of this treatment, is solidified before this child or this person or this individual even has a chance to challenge it. Here's the nugget for you here. The belief that you hold from your past experiences is not true. It was just the information that was available to you at the time. And at some point on your healing journey, you have to start recognizing that you repeating that story, that narrative over and over is just reinforcing that wound. And that's why session 7, the rewriting of your narrative, is so important, because this is the point where you, the adult that carries the pain, are now starting to do the nurturing and the reframing for the child or the inner child version of you that carries the wound. This is the work. This is why it's a challenge, because some of this process is challenging. So I want to show you all some of this in action, how this looks from a child's experience to what this looks like in your adult life, to what is the rationale that we use to tell ourselves these narratives, and what the reality looks like in our lives today. So let me give you the first example. A child that feels rejected and unseen by their parents. First, let me explain to you this. The narrative that we develop, oftentimes we don't recognize or understand that it is based on protecting ourselves. How can a negating thought or a limiting belief about myself be a means of protection? Coach, I need some context around that. So, and we'll get into this here in a little bit, but I want to show it to you here. When a child experiences, or when you as a child and you experience that traumatic event where you come to the conclusion that I'm not loved, or whatever that point is, the reason you form that conclusion is so that you can stop seeking that which is not available. Because it is through you continuously seeking it that you continue to experience the pain and the hurt and the disappointment of it not being available. So in the instance of a child that is rejected and unseen by their parents, the protective narrative is, I don't need anyone. I can do it all by myself. Why? Because I've been let down so many times by the people that were supposed to be there for me that I can't take another disappointment. So to avoid the pain and the rejection, I just won't depend on anybody at all. Do you see the rationale behind these stories that we tell ourselves? These conditions or these statements that we make as a means of protecting ourselves. I'm never going to let anybody ever disappoint me again. In essence, what I'm saying to myself is, I'm never going to allow myself to trust again. So what happens in my adult life? I struggle with intimacy. I am hyper independent. I refuse to ask for help, even when there are people in my life that may be available to help me, so much so that I convince myself that nobody has my back. Here's the wound. A child who constantly hears criticism, you're too loud, you're too much, you're too needy, you talk too much, sit down, you're touching too many. It's constantly criticism in their lives. What is the protective narrative that this child develops? I have to be perfect to be accepted. Nothing that I do is ever good enough unless it is perfect according to what they need to see. What is the rationale? I just can't get anything right. But if I get it right, maybe I won't be rejected. If I get it just perfect, if I do it exactly the way that they need it done, then maybe I won't face the rejection anymore. How does this show up in your adult life? This is your perfectionism that is driven by this unhealed wound of a child that was constantly criticized. A child that was never validated for the efforts and for the things that you did because it never was quite enough for a parent who was still struggling with their own wounds and trying to relive that through you. These are the people that are the overworkers, the people that fear failure, the people that never get a sense of satisfaction even after they've accomplished the things that they've set out for themselves. What's the wound? A child that grows up in an environment where emotions were dismissed or punished or looked at as weakness grows up with this protective narrative. I have to keep my feelings to myself. Why? Because showing emotions only lead to shame or punishment. And if I want to be safe, I have to hide my emotions. And what does this look like in your adult life? You struggle with emotional vulnerability. You have difficulty expressing your needs and you suppress your emotions until you poof, explode. And this is all born out of a wound of a child that feels like nothing I do is ever enough. But I need you all to understand that the narrative that we've been living by feels safe to us because it was developed as a means of protecting you. And that's why we struggle to let it go. The I'm not good enough to be loved. So if your experience was that you experienced deep loss, abandonment, or emotional inconsistency in your life, your protective narrative may be I am unlovable or people always leave. Why do you tell yourself that? Because at the point that I tell myself that, I no longer have to keep expecting people to show up for me. And if I stop expecting people to show up for me, I no longer have to worry about experiencing the disappointment. If I expect people to leave, I won't be blindsided by the abandonment again. If I expect it to go wrong, when it does, it won't hurt as much. But what does this lead to in your life? You end up self sabotaging your relationships because in your mind, you need to prove that narrative to be true, or they need to prove the narrative to be wrong, which means essentially they have to jump over additional hurdles just to love you, not because that is a means of them proving themselves, because that is what your trauma has presented. So you push people away before they can even leave. Because in your anticipation of them leaving, you start to push them away because it's safer. This is the analogy that I use to explain this, and it's a little bit dramatic, but I think it's necessary. The concept is if I self-detonate, at least I can control the implosion. But if I allow myself to trust and this thing end up blowing up in my face, I cannot control the explosion. So you struggle with fear of commitment in your adult life because of this wound of I am unlovable and people will always leave me. And until you heal that wound, even all the things that you may do in your adult life, that belief will continue to show up in one way or the other. If the experience of the wound is a child that was shamed for their body or their appearance or their abilities, they grow the protective narrative that I have to change myself to be accepted. Why? If I can just be thinner, stronger, more attractive, you add to the list what applies for your experience. If I can just be a little bit lighter, if my hair can just be a little bit longer, if my hair can just be a little bit curlier, if I was just a little bit prettier, if my lips were a little bit fuller, guys, if I was just a little bit stronger, if my shoulders were just a little bit broader, if I looked a little bit different, maybe I would finally be good enough. And what does this lead to in my adult life? We think these concepts of body dysmorphia is just born out of the fact that this person has a problem. I would like to offer you is born out of a deeper wound of a person that believes I am not good enough as I am. And I'm not saying that if you need to be healthier, you shouldn't be healthier. But what I will offer, and I offer this to my clients, if your desire to be a certain way as far as your body or your appearance is based on your desire to be healthier, then by all means go for it. But if you're being driven by a need to be accepted in a certain place or by a certain person or by a certain group of people, that need will show up again in a different place. That's why people that function out of that need in the weight loss or in the appearance space, they always what's the word that I want? They always relapse. They always fall back into the habit that they were running from. Because their reason for running from this habit is not based on a healthy sense of self, but it's based on an unhealed wound that continues to drive a narrative that continues to drive their life. I want us to all collectively recognize that the beliefs that we live by today, a lot of times, were not or were never our conscious choices. They were simple survival strategies. The way that I explain this to you all, at the point that you encounter your initial traumatic experience, you develop a persona or a personality to survive that environment. If the environment required you to shrink and disappear, and that was the way that you felt safe, then you became an introvert. If the environment required you to be as verbally abusive or as aggressive as the people that created the environment for you, then that's who you became. But those survival strategies that helped you to survive those critical moments of your life are now keeping you stuck today. And they may be hidden in your blind spots. Let's talk about some real life examples of how these things show up and where we may not be seeing them. Some of us over obsess with our appearance. And the truth is, it may be rooted in the belief that I am not enough unless I look a certain way. And this is often from a childhood body shaming or conditional love based on your looks. Someone at some point convinced you that you were not good enough as the little boy, girl, whomever you are, appearing the way that you are. So now you obsess over the way that you look because you want to feel accepted. Only if you knew that in that blind spot, the rest of us, especially those that can read, we see your insecurity. And this is why you feel like, I don't know how I keep attracting the wrong people into my life. How do they find me? Because what you think is just me being myself is a blind spot to all those that can see clearly that this obsession over your appearance, this obsession over you wearing a certain brand or looking a certain way, it is a clear communication to those that are able to read you. I'm not good enough unless I look this way. I'm not good enough unless I wear this. I'm not good enough unless I meet this standard of appearance. And I may convince myself that it's for me. I want to look this way for me. And that's why I spend 3, 4, 5 hours. And that's why I'm willing to miss important events in my life if I don't look a certain way. If I don't meet a certain appearance, I'm willing to forego the entire thing. But yet I'm convincing myself that this is healthy. That this is something that I'm just doing for me, but I'm willing to miss important events in my life. These limiting beliefs also show up in ways that we see ourselves as the chronic people pleaser. This too may be rooted in the fact that you may believe that my worth is based on how much I do for other people. If I'm not doing for other people, I don't feel valuable. If I'm not doing for other people, I don't feel important. If I'm not doing for other people, I don't feel as though I am of any use. Because I learned in my childhood that love had to be earned. It wasn't freely given. If I wasn't meeting certain standards, if I wasn't doing certain things, if I wasn't behaving according to the way that I was expected to behave, then I did not receive love. So what I've learned is that if I'm not meeting people's expectations, they won't love me. So now I show up as the chronic people pleaser. This narrative, whether clear to you or in your blind spot, has been driving and controlling your life. So in a basic progression of the first two that I've listed to you, a natural progression is you then find yourself attracting emotionally unavailable partners and people to you. This is rooted in your experience that love means trying to prove that I'm worth staying for. Because if I received inconsistent affection, if I only received affection when I was pleasing those that were in charge of giving it to me, then what did I learn? What's the natural progression from these three? Well, it's natural that I'm constantly seeking external validation. Because it's natural for me to then believe I'm only valuable if other people approve of me. Why? My self-worth was tied to achievements. If I didn't meet the standards, I wasn't loved on. I wasn't validated. So what happens? I have turned into this person that is constantly seeking or needing somebody to validate or affirm that I'm doing it right, that I'm saying it right, that I'm wearing it right, whatever it is, or that I look good enough. These things that become so trivial in our lives because they become our internal struggles. We've become so good at hiding them externally that they're just our internal struggles. I want you to understand that those struggles are not random and they're not normal either. They are the echoes of your past, the echoes of the limiting beliefs that is born out of your unhealed inner child wound that are playing out in real time. And if you found yourself struggling to break free from those patterns, it's because you're trying to solve the wrong problem. You don't fix the behaviors. You have to heal the belief that created them. And that's exactly what the Trauma to Triumph Healing Challenge is built to do. I can say my journey took me years, over 20 years of doing this work. So the fact that many of us have spent years living in a story that wasn't ours, that's common. But what if today is the day that you decide to take back control and take the pen and start writing your own narrative? What if you were somebody else's worst mistake, or you were the child that wasn't loved enough? What if you weren't good enough, you weren't lovable enough, you aren't enough? What if all of those narratives that came out of the way other people treated you, what if today those narratives stop and you take the pen of your life and you start writing? One of the biggest misconceptions I think that many of us experience, and I think it comes from religion, is that we think healing just happens. That if I just believe hard enough, it's just gonna happen. If I just listen long enough, it's just gonna happen. Like something is gonna click and then I'm gonna heal. But it doesn't just happen. You have to decide to do the work. And that's why I always remind you all, this thing that we do here every day is not about making you feel good about yourself so you can go have a great day. It's about opening thought patterns and ideas in your mind so you can see, so that you can see. What have we put together with this challenge? There are 2 weekly private Zoom sessions that are exclusively for those that are enrolled in the challenge. You get your Trauma to Triumph Challenge workbook express shipped to you. You get ongoing email access and support directly from myself. You get to be a part of our private community that are going to walk this journey with you. And the most important thing about the private Zoom sessions, which are our masterclass, that I find is not the teaching that happens in the masterclass, but it's the camaraderie. It is the story. It is the understanding that this is not something that I am exclusively facing, but not only is it common, but there are a collective of people that are navigating it with me. Either they've navigated where I am or they are where I am, but I have that support. So for those of you that are joining us on YouTube, you can find information about the Trauma to Triumph Healing Challenge in the description of this video. I won't go into the current pricing structure as far as our promo codes and everything, because those may change by the time that you actually make it to see this video. But the challenge will still be going on, and you can still find the information either here in the description of this video or on our website at happyhealin.com. As always, I appreciate you all being a part of this very impactful conversation, and I will see you all on the second follow-up episode of the Rewriting Your Narratives Session 7 within the workbook. As always, I love you all, and happy healing.